Hello everybody, Infinite Shinjo here and welcome back to the channel. And today I am here to discuss 10 duels in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters series that should have happened. Now, I was thinking about this idea for a while now, and I decided to make a video about it. Not a top 10, because it's hard to rank which duels are more important in my opinion, so instead I'm just going to list off all 10. They're not going to be in any particular order. Some of them have more reasoning behind it than others, but I tried to keep the duels relatively tame so I wouldn't change the story of Duel Monsters that much. The first duel is the one on the thumbnail, Joey versus Atem. So technically, this duel happened. At the end of Battle City, Atem was ready to face off against Joey to get Joey's red eyes back, but the duel was never shown, and then Joey got his red eyes back later. But that is not the duel I'm talking about. I didn't put this on the list, but I think, in my opinion, the finale of Battle City should have been Joey managing to overcome Merrick, taking his Wind Dragon of Ra. He can't use it because ancient scriptures. Yugi defeats Kaiba, of course, and the finals is Yugi versus Joey. So it all depends on if Joey gets his red eyes back and all that stuff. It is a rehash of Duelist Kingdom in that sense, but I just like the idea of those two facing off in the finals just a little bit better than the generic Merrick versus Yugi. And on that note, to give Joey more duels, he's going to face off against Bandit Keith for a second time. And the main reason I did this is because instead of the little filler between Duelist Kingdom and Battle City where Bandit Keith is controlled by Merrick, where Yugi duels him, I decided to have Joey duel him instead. Because these two share a lot more of a rivalry than Bandit Keith and Yugi, it just makes more sense for me for Joey to defeat Bandit Keith again. This one is pretty self-explanatory. I think that Ishizu and Merrick should have dueled, whether they do it in the tournament or they just do it off screen somewhere, it doesn't really matter. Because Ishizu essentially blames herself for letting the God cards get stolen and all that stuff. So I feel like those two dueling was just inevitable. And the fact that they're siblings makes it a little bit more interesting. Granted, you probably could put Odie on here and not much would change, but I just like this idea better. Next up is another Joey duel, Joey versus Tristan. So for any fans of the Duelist Kingdom series, there was an episode where Joey and Tristan got into a fight, Swamp Battle Guard and Lava Battle Guard were there. And I think what should have been done, granted a lot of early duels were one episode anyway, I think it would have been fun to see Joey face off against Tristan, and then the second part is Joey facing Rex or somebody facing Rex or whatever. Granted, Tristan was never really much of a duelist, I just like the idea of Joey facing off against Tristan because they were like best buds back in the day. They both tormented Yugi. I can definitely see something building here. Granted, Tristan probably has no chance of winning since every duel he's been in, he's lost. But it's just an interesting duel anyway. Now here we go with some more interesting ones. Mai versus Darts. So I don't know if any of my audience watched anything of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! If they were fans of the Orichalco saga or the World Championship Grand Prix, but I actually like them even though they weren't manga based. I like them just from nostalgia, and I think the one issue that I had was that Mai just kind of changed and became over to the bad side out of nowhere. I think it would have been better to give Darts another duel and defeat Mai and kind of build him up as this grand villain. Because realistically, he only dueled one time. So I feel like him defeating Mai would make it so he can essentially brainwash her over to their side and give Dark some more credibility. Speaking of villains, next up is Mokuba versus Leon. So I actually just came up with this idea right now. For the World Championship Grand Prix, the last arc before the Egyptian arc, there was this person named Siegfried that was trying to take over Kaiba's company, as you do. Kaiba was hosting another tournament, and the prize was a chance to defeat Yugi because he was already built up as this big person at this point. and Leon ended up being the one that would face off against Yugi. And come to find out, Leon is related to Siegfried, and they both are essentially bad guys in this situation. I think instead what should have happened is they are getting ready to start the duel, Yugi and Leon, and then Kaiba finds out, oh, Leon is related to Siegfried, and it's just all a big trap set by Siegfried. So instead, Mokuba, being the one that's trying to be in charge of this tournament, steps up to duel Leon instead. Granted, Mokuba hasn't really dueled much either, but I just like that idea. And the fact that Leon and Mokuba are both the younger brothers of Kaiba and Siegfried and Siegfried dueled, but they didn't. I just think this was just a perfect match that never happened. On the subject of perfect matches that never happened, next up is Mokuba versus Noah. The virtual world is also another arc that people are kind of criticizing a lot, but I just like it just from how absurd it is. And I think that Noah being the surprise villain at the end should have been the one to duel Mokuba instead of Kaiba dueling him. Because in all honesty, Duelist Kingdom especially, I just get tired of evil villain comes in and Yugi has to be the one to defeat them. Granted, it doesn't really change much in later series, but it just kind of gets overdone. And considering Noah isn't that big of a threat when compared to someone like Pegasus or Merrick, I think it should have been Mokuba. Give Mokuba another duel. The subject of people that should have gotten more duels, up next is Taya versus Rebecca. So this will most likely happen in the Waking the Dragons Orichalco saga as well, because at that point Rebecca comes back to the group. Taya and her get into a lot of arguments because they're essentially in a love triangle with Yugi and Yugi doesn't know it. So I think just a lull in all of the Orichalco's madness happening should have been a duel where Taya faces off against Rebecca, essentially fighting over Yugi. Would certainly add to the whole thing of Taya only facing off against female characters, besides Krumpa the Big Five, because she faced off against Mai in Duelist Kingdom, and outside of the Virtual World arc, that was the only duel that she had. I think giving Taya another duel would kind of make her more important, because her and Tristan were just sideline characters and cheerleaders. Speaking of Tristan, up next we have Duke versus Tristan, and it's essentially the same as the last one. Duke and Tristan were both fighting over Joey's sister Serenity, much like Taya and Rebecca fought over Yugi, so I think those two facing off against each other would be an interesting matchup to say the least. It could happen most likely outside of the Virtual World arc because there was really no lull in the duels. So instead, the episode where they're fighting on the blimp and they almost fall off should have just been a duel instead. Especially since Duke and Tristan never got many duels. I think it'll be interesting to see Duke's dice deck in action. And the final duel of this episode is Joey versus Valen. Yup, we started this episode with Joey, we end the episode with Joey. There's no other way around it. So the Orichalco saga I've brought up a lot of times, and the thing that I'm trying to figure out is out of the three legendary heroes that they built up, Joey, Yugi, and Kaiba, Yugi and Kaiba dueled their respective opponents twice. Yugi lost to Raphael the first time, Kaiba drew with Alistair the first time, and then he beat him the second time, but Joey only got one duel with Valen. I just don't understand why they only gave them one duel where the other ones got two duels. I think they could have had Valen duel against Joey instead of Rebecca and Duke in that one episode, but that's just my opinion. I love Valen's armor deck and I love Joey as a character, so I feel like these two dueling twice wouldn't have been that big of an issue. But that is my video of 10 duels in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters that should have happened. Like I said at the start, some of them have more reasoning than others, so I kind of just said what I thought, and that was it. I didn't really have any notes for this, so if there's anything that you think I could improve on for later videos, like list off strategies that they could come up with or something, I'm all ears. But I'm going to be recording the next two immediately following this, so no changes will be made up until the Zexo one. Let me know what you think about these duels I came up with, and I'll see you next time. Momentai.